is Marlene Atkowitz, and I thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you tonight regarding the proposed changes to Minnesota state law pertaining to mandatory school vaccinations. Currently, parents have the right to delay or opt out entirely of all recommended vaccines required for school-age children. In order to achieve this exemption, parents simply need to fill out a form and submit it to the Minnesota Department of Health. We represent a parents' rights organization. Together with my colleagues Jennifer Kane and Lindsay Anderson, I would like you to know that we strongly oppose the modification of the conscientious objection legislation currently before the Minnesota House and Senate. The proposed legislation goes against the basic parental right to determine what is in the best interest of their child's health. This legislation forces parents to vaccinate their children against their wishes. As with any medical intervention, vaccination is not without risk. There have been documented cases of serious adverse events occurring following vaccination, some of which have led to death. Because vaccination comes with risk, there must also be choice. Many people are in favor of this legislation. They feel that it's important to strengthen the vaccination laws in order to improve the public health of our school system. However, we disagree with that opinion. With less than 2% of the population in Minnesota requesting an exemption for conscientious objection, why would we take away a parent's individual right to choose what's in the best interest of their child? We don't force any other medical tests or exams or medication on the residents of Minnesota, and why should our children be any different? Recently, legislation was introduced to the House and Senate of the Minnesota legislature. Both of these proposed bills are aimed at increasing the requirements needed to claim a conscientious objection to the vaccination laws currently on the books. These bills are really intended to circumvent the parental right of freedom of choice to decide what is the best action to take for a child. The requirements of this new legislation include forcing the parents who opt out for conscientious objection to attend an educational session with their physician explaining the rationale behind vaccination. This action is assuming that parents are making the decision to delay or opt out of vaccinations out of lack of information or education, when in fact the opposite is true. We have found that more highly educated people are deciding that they choose to not vaccinate because of the health risks that are associated with vaccination. Lastly, a provider has the option to decline signing the declaration of conscientious objection requested by the parent. This then puts a significant strain on the patient-provider relationship. Who has the right to make the decision of what's in the best interests of the child, the provider or the parent? What we find really interesting is that while the industry, the pharmaceutical industry and the public health community have been espousing the safety and the efficacy of vaccinations, there have been numerous lawsuits over the years to the vaccine companies when a child has suffered harm as a result of receiving a vaccination. As a result of these lawsuits, the industry began to slow production of the vaccines. In response to this, the federal government enacted the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. This act protects the provider and the vaccine producer from being sued in the event of an adverse reaction. Interesting, isn't it? You can't sue the manufacturer of the vaccine that caused harm to your child, yet you're being forced to have that vaccine administered to your child. Following the inception of this act, parents who feel that their child has suffered harm as a result of a vaccine are now required to submit a claim. These claims are then reviewed by adjusters on a case-by-case basis. The adjusters will decide if the family has a legitimate claim, and if so, how much they will receive in compensation. While rare, vaccines have been associated with serious and even fatal adverse events. Some of these include a severe allergic reaction, encephalitis, or other chronic medical conditions, including Guillain-Barré, following vaccination. The Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System is a national surveillance repository where healthcare providers report actual or potential adverse reactions related to vaccines. This is so our public health system can monitor for trends in increased adverse events following vaccination and intervene rapidly. Why would this be necessary if vaccines were safe? What price do we put for the child who requires a lifetime of medical care after suffering an adverse event related to a vaccine? The School of Public Health at Harvard University did a study, and they determined that the care of a child with autism over their lifetime cost the American society approximately $3.2 million. While the link between vaccines and autism is still under debate, the question still exists. What price do we put on a human life? Several key stakeholders have a vested interest in seeing this legislation passed, including public health experts, medical professionals, and educators. Opponents to this legislation also have a vested interest. This law does not come without a cost. We can speak to the direct costs associated with vaccination, including the cost of the vaccine itself, which is approximately $23, and the cost of the provider visit required to administer the vaccine. But we can also talk about the intangible costs. What price do we put on our loss of personal liberty? What price do we put on the loss of a child due to an adverse event? In conclusion, Jennifer, Lindsay, and I would like to reiterate that we strongly oppose any change in legislation to the Minnesota state mandatory vaccination requirements. As it stands, less than 2% of the school population decline vaccination due to personal conscientious objection. And we feel that that number is so small that it is unjust to force those parents who opt not to vaccinate their children to receive vaccinations that they don't want. Not only that, they're forced to receive a vaccination that they have no legal recourse in the event of an adverse reaction. So they're going to be saddled with a lifetime of care for a child that had a vaccination that they didn't want in the first place. Jennifer, Lindsay, and I strongly urge you to vote no on Senate Bill 143 and House Bill 96. Today, our personal liberty and parental choice is at risk. Tomorrow, what's next? Thank you kindly for your time and attention to this very important matter.